Hey, boys and girls, we are back live for another session of Ask Us Anything.
Hello.
It's me, Victor, Scott, you know us. Well, no need to say anything. Let's jump straight into the questions. Just write them down. We already have 5, 6, 7, I don't know how many. So, cool. First one, path to SaaS in cloud to scale from MVP to a higher scale. Key steps should be considered along the way, including architecture choices, cost versus time management, and the use of managed services. And I don't have a blank statement, kind of like do A, B, C. What I do know is that I don't like when people go crazy and kind of, hey, MVP should have everything that my large-scale cluster 7 years from now should have. Let's put everything there. And GitOps and service meshes and 75 security tools. Just kind of go easy. It's MVP. It's not supposed to be high scale. I don't know. You probably have something more structured. The only thing I will say, managed services depends on the service. Like Kubernetes cluster, if you're in cloud, yeah, managed service. Don't even think about setting it up yourself, right? Database, yeah, go for Postgres or whatever you're using as a managed service, and then switch to self-managed when you say, oh, it costs too much, and so on and so forth. As long as you calculate.
But only use managed services. However, managed services that you can self-host after. It's a very important thing. Like if you're creating a SaaS, do not use Aurora DB. Use RDS Postgres.
Exactly.
Use something that is easy for you. Use S3 buckets in AWS. And if you decide down the road to deploy MinIO yourself and self-host it, it's the exact same S3 object store API. Don't deploy something that is going to lock you into that specific implementation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, more often than not, you want to use managed services based on top of widely used or open source projects, like PostgreSQL. Yeah, RDS. You're going to save yourself time from the start. It will not be kind of painless to switch to self-managed RDS. There is always work involved, right? But it will be easier than, I dare anybody to tell me how much time, if you have 1,000 Lambda applications, move them somewhere else and tell me how it went, right?
Exactly. Like I believe in these things also. Like you can do IAM based like authentication to RDS, things like that. Don't use HashiCorp Vault, for example, with dynamic secrets that pull in and whatever, and use something that will work also when you deploy Postgres yourself. Like when you are doing things, there's enough examples out there for how to do it that the amount of work is very low. That don't lock yourself into these uniquenesses of the cloud. If you're building a SaaS that often, unfortunately, in this world, there are many companies that come and say, yeah, we'll use your product, but only if you're hosted in this cloud. Or we can't use SaaSes that are hosted in X cloud. SaaS solutions often need to run in multiple clouds, be that due to regions, be that due to regulations, be that due to whatever. So don't lock yourself in when you're a SaaS.
There is one exception, though. Unless you see that there is a heavy price to pay from the start.
Right.
So if you say, hey, let's say that the only two choices are to use AWS Secret Manager or to set up Vault yourself, and you never did it, maybe actually...
Use AWS Secrets Manager. That's fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, the next one from Liam. What is the best approach for collecting metrics, logs, and monitoring multiple clusters? Is it common to have a cluster dedicated to things like Grafana and Loki? First, depends on the tools. Like, some tools you might want to keep in each cluster. Some tools you might want to have across clusters. Like Prometheus is a good example. You probably want to at least start with Prometheus in each cluster. Kind of having a central Prometheus that pulls from multiple clusters, that is already complicated, right?
Yeah.
And but is it common to have a cluster dedicated to things like Grafana, Loki, or whatever else? Yes, at scale.
Yeah.
Now, if you tell me I have two applications, I'm not going to create a separate cluster management cluster for two applications.
Exactly. I think that the scale is once you get above 3 workload clusters, let's call it. Because managing even 2 instances of something, okay, fine. But the second that you're actually moving 3 or above that you have to manage of your configurations, it makes sense for those centralized things to have in one place. For example, what you were saying with Prometheus, I like having Prometheus in each cluster, but then also having Prometheus do remote writes to a shared Prometheus or have the shared Prometheus scrape those.
Yeah.
Because I like to give each cluster, each tenant access to their Prometheus, but me as like a central operations team, I want one pane of glass above everything, right? And so you can kind of get the best of all worlds there.
But it's probably based on what you said earlier, kind of like if I have 2 clusters, I'm not putting the third Prometheus to collect the metrics from 2 clusters.
Exactly. It all comes down to scale in the end.
Okay, the next one from Bernd. What is the best way to get data sources in Crossplane, like dynamically getting AWS AMI ID based on some filters? Again, depends on scale. Like if you tell me, hey, I have, I don't know, 1,000 AMIs, my answer will be complicated.
So I actually have an answer to this, though.
Okay.
Which is it for AWS or for Azure, there is already a solution, and for others, there is a framework called functions. And there is the AWS.
I was getting there, yeah.
There's function shell, which has AWS CLI that lets you run whatever you want, get the JSON as an output, and then patch from there. And there's the Azure Resource Graph function that lets you query anything from the Azure API and just return data that you use. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a few resources, I would just create MRs directly in observe-only mode. 3, 5, maybe, right?
Right.
But anything beyond that, you're right. The only thing that I would say is that alternative to what you said is still a function that queries AWS, whatever. But then that function can be creating all those MRs, because sometimes in read-only mode, sometimes it's more convenient to reference resources.
It can be, yeah. Exactly.
Okay, from Neha. I hope that I'm pronouncing names right. If not, tell me in the comments. Can I connect Crossplane installed in Kite cluster to AWS accounts using IAM roles? I never tried it. I would guess no.
So I have done this. It is possible. It's hacky.
Possible for you or possible for everybody?
It's possible. I did this also for Tanzu back in the day, and actually there's a GitHub repo where I show how to do this, and I actually have Terraform code that does all of it for you. On Tanzu, like you have to implement the same thing for Kind, but it's the same thing. Basically, you have to really mess around with some API server flags, though. You have to create an S3 bucket. You have to generate a JWKS endpoint that you put in a public endpoint, create an OIDC provider in AWS, integrate them, and then it works. It's just not simple. It can be automated.
Yeah, so basically the answer is essentially no.
Well, no.
Unless you're really persistent.
No, but I'll tell you why it's not necessarily a no. If you run Kind always on the same machine, you only need to generate that configuration once in AWS, and then just like remap that into every Kind cluster that you create. So it could be a one-time setup, and then you could just continue to reuse it across all of your Kind clusters as long as they kept the same name, same whatever. And then it can be good for like demos and things like that if you really wanted to. I don't recommend doing it. The reason that we built it for Tanzu clusters was like people that have clusters in AWS and in vSphere and wanted to be able to connect to S3 buckets and all of that using IAM roles. And they had applications that were moving between the two, and they had applications in AWS that needed those credentials. So it made sense to set that up on premise so that they could get that capability. For Kind, which are throwaway clusters, it can be done. Probably not worth the effort, though.
Okay, from David, I've got my apps running in a Kubernetes cluster on AWS, but now security says I need to have network policies in place. Why? My group is the only tenant in my cluster, and your group is the only tenant in your cluster until it's not. Until other people end up being your tenants without you knowing that they're tenants in your cluster. Right?
Exactly. You're the only tenant you know of in your cluster.
Yeah. So why? Because somebody can enter your cluster without being you. Now, apart from why, equally important question is, should you, right? Now, everybody will, security people will always say, yeah, of course, you should have 0 CVEs in your images. You should have network policies for absolutely everything, and so on and so forth, right? It's better to have them than not, but then you need to calculate whether it's worth the effort, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's simply everything adds work, right?
Right.
And it's very easy. And I'm now throwing people under the bus, but it's very easy for somebody to say, you should have this. My answer is sometimes to you should have it. Excellent. Do it. Excellent. You do it.
Right. Now, I will say network policies are, I think, very important in anything that is considered production. I think that production clusters, even single tenant, need them. Now, do they need to be as stringent and as locked down and as perfected as they need to be in multi-tenant clusters? No, but you should have at least basic ones that get you, what you should be doing. And there are great tools out there. Inspector Gadget is the best open source one that was acquired by Microsoft, but still open source. It's an awesome tool that basically just watches the traffic in your cluster and generates for you network policies that you can then go and apply. The effort of doing network policies is becoming much lower, and that's why I don't believe it is almost. I don't want to say it's not legitimate, but it's not legitimate to run Kubernetes applications without network policies. The second it becomes so easy to create those network policies using tools like Inspector Gadget. It's like, I did not blame anyone that didn't sign things with PGP keys and all the fun things back in the day. But now that we have cosign, anyone that doesn't sign their container images, I don't understand it. It's like, when we make security things easy, why not do them? Like, you almost have to fight against doing it because it's no effort.
I mean, in general, I agree with you.
It's not no effort.
It's always, like, let's say that it's very low effort if you did it, but not necessarily low effort if you haven't done it before, right? Kind of, you just said Inspector Gadget, right? Somebody might, I'm not saying that that's the reason not to do it, but for you it might be 15 minutes, for somebody it might be a week, right? Because I need to figure out kind of which tools to use,
Exactly. No, once you know of the tools, though, of like the industry needs to do a better job at like saying this is how to easily do network policies. And like, this is what I wish the Kubernetes documentation almost did. But it tries to say so vendor neutral and tool neutral that it doesn't get into things. It's like the network policy documentation should put a recommendation from the Kubernetes project saying to easily implement this within your environments, utilize a tool like Inspector Gadget. Here is a small script that does this for you that you can run in CI, right? And just like give that type of a recommendation. If that were out there on like the official docs, everyone would do it because it would be easy. But today you have to know about Inspector Gadget with a K, by the way, because it's for Kubernetes.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean, I would add to that actually I would, even more than from Kubernetes itself, at least for us running managed Kubernetes, I think that managed services should do a better job of saying, okay, when you create a cluster here in AWS, in your case, right? It comes with those things. Kind of, you need to, what I would do is for EKS, GKE, whatever, I would force people to opt out from some things instead of opting in. Kind of, oh, you need to have network policies. We're going to give you the option not to have them, but you need to say explicitly that you don't want it. In a way, opt out instead of opt in.
Yeah. That's the challenge with like, there was a whole fight in the Kubernetes world about like when you do dangerous things with kubectl, like kubectl delete -- all or whatever, that it should prompt you for, are you sure? And they wanted to add that in to kubectl, and it's actually there. There is actually a flag now that says like -- prompt. However, you have to put a flag saying, hi, please prompt me so that I will ask you if it should be deleted. Why? Because you can't make a breaking change like that everyone's automations in the world that run kubectl delete within them would all break at that moment. It's like Docker runs by default as root. Could you imagine how much of a breaking change it would be if container images, when you built them, all of a sudden, like by default, did not run as root?
The world will stop working. I know. The only difference is that I feel that should be more of a responsibility of those who are creating distributions than Kubernetes itself.
Right. I think that I'm not even sure that's the job of the distribution. I think that's the job of the platform team. That's like the platform engineering team within an organization should have a Kyverno policy or whatever that auto-generates network policies in a namespace. And you could add a annotation on your namespace saying, exempt from network policies. I take full responsibility for everything that I do. Blame me and send the bill to me when we get hacked. And then, great.
Okay, from Guy. How much usage of image signing and/or attestations do you see in the industry? Do you see any implementations of runtime security enforcement that actually uses that? And I would say yes to both. Huge. But then everybody ends up ignoring it. That's my lay of the land right now, kind of. Because, signing images and creating attestations and S-bombs and what's not, it's so easy. Kind of like you just need to add it to whichever pipeline you're using right now. Kind of like it's yet another line and all of a sudden everything is signed and we get the S-bombs and all that stuff, right? That's easy. There is no good reason not to do it even if you never use it. Now, what is happening is that then somebody let's say S-bomb, right? Somebody starts looking at that S-bomb and says, oh, you know what? You have a bunch of open source libraries over here that nobody approved. Can you go through the process of approving all that? And people just say, yeah, I'm not shipping anything this year. Right? Kind of like, what do I do with it, right? It's similar thing like, I'm going to use even simpler example. It's not the same, but follows the same logic kind of with security scanning, right? How many companies are security scanning and start with the idea, we're at least not going to have any high. And I'm yet to see the company that doesn't have any high. I never saw it. I don't think it exists, at least at larger scale.
Yeah. I see image signing and attestations and SBOM generation a lot. And we're seeing a lot of tools that are there for runtime security that can enforce it, like Kyverno, like things like, well, those aren't runtime. Those are admission, let's call them. So let's be exact here. I don't know of any runtime security enforcement that people are really doing. What there is a lot of, though, is tools, whether it's OPA, whether it's Kyverno, that do admission policies or cosign, right? Their webhook from cosign itself. That can validate it. The biggest challenge that I've seen around this, though, is no one gets all their images from one location, right? I get my images from 50 different registries, from many different open source projects, from commercial tools, whatever. Now, I'd say a large portion of those are signed images. But if I want to validate them, it also means that I have to get their keys and add them into my validation policies and all of that. And that's where I really wish that these tools, like when Kyverno released their images, one of these artifacts should be a Kyverno policy for validating the Kyverno images that they are signed with their key. And I should do the same thing. OPA should do that for theirs. And Bitnami, let's say, who signed their images using cosign, should have a cosign, a Kyverno, and an OPA policy as artifacts that you can use of here. If they gave me that, I would do it. It would be easy. And I think the industry would implement that. And the issue is that these companies are just, here's my key, figure it out.
Yeah, I signed the image. And you're never going to find out whether that's really the case.
Exactly. Yeah, you could take this SHA and you could go to the, registry here and you can go to the tough whatever and you can find it. I wish that they would just if there are 3 industry standards around this of tools that validate, just every tool there should be a GitHub action because everyone uses GitHub actions today to publish these things and to sign. There should be a GitHub action that just generates 3 release artifacts, Kyverno policy, OPA policy, cosign policy to validate this artifact and just release that with every release. And from that point on, boom, like easy. And any tool could just add that one GitHub action in to their workflows. And like it would make life so much easier for people and it would gain usage, I think.
Okay, from Jason, it's more like a statement than a question. You have to know your exit plan, not always avoid lock-in. True. I mean,
yeah. I think that's related
just to be
the
clear,
SaaS question before.
Exactly. And I'd like to add here that you're always locked in, just to be clear.
Correct.
The question is whether you're locked into a vendor or a tool, right? If you use Jenkins open source, and I'm using it as example, you're locked into Jenkins. If you created Jenkins jobs for 5 years, you're not going out. I mean, not
Right.
because Jenkins is bad, but anything else. You're locked in always. The question is whether you're locked in into the specific company or a specific project, right? I can get away from. I mean, if I start using Postgres, I'm never going out of the Postgres database, at least not for that application. But Postgres gives me more exits, right? Kind of.
Postgres, I could go to RDS. I could do enterprise on-premise with EDB. I could use Bitnami. I could use Tanzu. I could use CNPG. I could use whatever, Azure, Google. Doesn't matter. I'm free to move around with that technology.
Here's another distinction when locking in. So if you both agree that you're locked into tools just as much as vendors, I think that in last year or so, it became so much more evident that it's not enough that it's necessarily only open source, right? Because if you're locked into an open source project and that project is owned by a single company, right? You're locked in a way to that company even though you don't know it, right?
Yes,
exactly. If you're locked into an open source project that is or service on top of that open source project that is, let's say, in a foundation, then you have more exits.
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
more, not necessarily that.
Right. And I think that the industry has done a good job at mitigating that when it really counted, right? So we have, for those that were hurt by the, HashiCorp decisions, because of whatever reasons, OpenTofu came around and you can basically migrate. For those that were hurt by, the changes of Redis, there's Valkyrie. For those that were hurt by Elasticsearch changing their license, there's OpenSearch, right? So forks happen and that lets you kind of get saved. But that's because those are such highly used tools that there was such a large community that was able to take it upon itself to fork it and continue to maintain a fork. Meaning it's okay to use vendored open source if it has a large enough community that even if that vendor decided to stop, you would still be able to have a large enough community to continue maintaining it.
True. But as you said, that's valid only for a very small number of projects, right?
Correct.
Take a smaller project. If it gets locked, that's it.
It dies. Exactly.
Or sometimes you will also get during first few months, maybe half a year, there is a community around it that forked it, and then you see it died because nobody really had strong interest in going there.
Exactly.
Okay, from Ari, what is your opinion on the rendered manifest pattern in the context of GitOps?
Yes.
Kind of huge yes. Because it's, whether we like it or no, YAML and JSON, first of all, are standard. You need to have it, kind of, especially Kubernetes, kind of. That's the only way you can put something to API. people come to me and say, no, you can send Helm. You cannot send Helm to Kubernetes API. You just don't see it, but you're getting rendered manifests whether you want it or no matter what you're using. The question is, in my head, is not whether you render manifests because you're always rendering them, but whether you're storing rendered manifests in Git, which is probably what you, Scott, also put thumbs up.
So yes, however, I go back and forth on this because the exact opposite of this approach is Crossplane. Crossplane says, I'm going to move the logic in cluster. Rendered manifest pattern says move all of the logic into an external process that generates the manifest that then goes into the cluster so that I have my desired state in Git, instead of functions and things like that within Crossplane that are going to create random things. Now, I will state, though, that deployment you create. You do not put replica sets and pods in Git also, right? And deployment does create replica set pod, but it's a fine line between those two. My issue is when we store as our desired state something that is not declarative. So I don't care if it's Crossplane, which is why I say it's a bit of a difference than the rendered manifests. I don't care if it's rendered or not. I care if it's declarative or not. And Helm is not declarative. It's imperative because there's still templating happening. YTT is still imperative because it has code within it that's going to generate the output. I want what will be applied to Kubernetes to be in Git.
Yes.
That's all I care about, right?
Exactly. Kind of like basically you want whatever is the final
kubectl apply minus F.
Yeah, exactly.
kubectl apply minus F, that is what should be in Git.
Exactly. Not minus K.
Or Crossplane. Correct.
Exactly.
That's why I specifically said minus F after the apply, even though I never say anything after kubectl apply. Right? But that could be, I don't care if you're using Cradix, kubevela, Crossplane, Crow, custom operators that do a million things in the backend. That's awesome. Right? Which almost like stands in parallel to rendered manifests. But it doesn't stand against declarative Git versus imperative Git.
I mean, the way I see it is that one of the main reasons why I want that is because when I'm supposed to figure out, okay, so how many replicas is supposed to be in this deployment, I cannot do mental calculation. My brain is not simply good enough to go through a Helm template and oh, there is an if statement. Oh, there is, I cannot do it.
How about, like, let's take the largest chart that exists on planet Earth, which is the Cube Prometheus stack, right? It is insane how large it is. Go take that, and when you upgrade from version 1 to version 1.1, what does that tell you when your the application or Flux Helm release has one line in the Git diff of 1.0 to 1.1? Absolutely nothing. What does it tell you if you had the manifest to see, oh, wow, like this actually changes 150 different manifests in my cluster. I should probably take a look.
Exactly. Okay, from Akash, DevOps is getting hard to get into as a fresher, 100%. There are hardly 10 internships on LinkedIn related to it. So hard even after having a product-based internship, have decent skills as a fresher. The only thing I can say is that I think it's a terrible idea to start with DevOps. To me, DevOps, I'm going to ignore how DevOps is bloated nonsense in most companies in practical terms. So I'm going to use the practical explanation as DevOps. You know everything about everything, and you manage everything by yourself alone, kind of. Which is, I'm parking that conversation, right? But that's not how you start. That's not how you start. The same thing as, if your first coding experience will be, you know what? Go and change the search algorithm in Google. That's not how you start. That's where you get later.
Right. Exactly.
Now, I would focus always on something, whatever that something is, right? Hopefully basics. But then you say that you still call yourself DevOps, kind of like, so because it pays better. So do it.
Right.
Just in name.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so from DZ, S3 bucket being used as an EFS store for model data to an EC2 instance, need to get the data into local cluster and attached as a volume suggestions.
Being
S3 bucket. You could with Minio connect to the S3, real S3, right?
I think so. But you need to get the data into a local cluster and attach as a volume. Well, I think the question is, what does that mean? It needs to be in the local cluster, meaning if it needs to be accessible from a container within there as a volume, there is the COSI, I think it's called, the Container Object Storage Interface, which is similar to CSI, but for object storage specifically. So technically, you could integrate COSI for object storage-based volumes in Kubernetes. So that's a way to look at it, possibly, if you needed to. But yeah, probably it would be data replication to something like MinIO otherwise.
Or create a backup and restore it.
Yeah, although model data can be large.
That's true. But, when it's a large model and what's not, I wouldn't go for local in the first place.
It's what I'm really looking forward to is it currently exists only in Cryo, unless it was merged over the last 2 weeks when I wasn't looking in Containerd, but there's now support from the CRI perspective in Kubernetes to mount OCI images as volumes in a pod. So that only works in Cryo today, but the idea is it mounts it as a read-only volume. So you get all the benefits of local caching, layer caching, all of that of the container runtime, but you can actually just mount an OCI artifact as a volume into a pod. And the idea of that was actually built for AI, so that you could take an AI model and just mount it into an Olama pod, let's say, and just mount it in and start running, but it doesn't need to be built into my actual container image with my application. I can just mount in a OCI artifact with that model. I'm waiting for that to be merged into Containerd to use it because I do not use Cryo. I only know one distribution that uses Cryo, and I don't use it. So, yeah.
Okay. Nikos, which provider do you think offers the best Kubernetes service and why? I will answer it from the user perspective. Not necessarily this is the best Kubernetes, right? GKE and AKS are beautiful, easy. From the user perspective, right? EKS is just too complicated. I'm not saying that's not a good thing. Sometimes you want to have the control that AWS gives you, but yeah, GKE, AKS, great. And all the small providers, DigitalOceans of the world, they're also great.
So I think by far the best is AKS. If we're talking major clouds, AKS is the most complete solution. If you're saying a Kubernetes service, right, that's not just a Kubernetes cluster, it's everything around it. And especially with AKS Automatic today, I think it is by far the best. I think it's way better than GKE, I think, who have been left behind in that area of a full holistic solution of Kubernetes that you get with AKS with all of their add-ons and extensions. And if we're talking on-prem solutions, distributions, Spectral Cloud Palette is the best. After that is probably something like Tanzu if you're in VMware. And if you're in an industry that is, married to Red Hat and love them and whatever, it's a very nice packaging that somewhere at its deep, deep core, I believe there is some Kubernetes called OpenShift. I've been told that there's Kubernetes somewhere in that.
Laying asleep. From Dennis, Crossplane functions are being continuously executed. Is it optimal flow? Shouldn't be a built-in way to synchronize execution of code, which builds up the composition pipeline? Could it be improved? Yes. I mean, only Scott and I were talking about it before the show with Doug, potentially. Yes. But ignoring now that it could be improved, optimal, the point of Crossplane, and being optimal, that's mostly for the initial synchronization, right? First minute or two or something like that. Afterwards, I think it's just as optimal as it can get. I mean, always can be improved, right? Because the point really is to manage the life cycle of each resource separately, which avoids quite a few problems. And so ignoring maybe the initial setup where it could be improved, I'd say it's okay, right? Just to be clear, to manage the state of things, right? Now, if you try to use Crossplane to manage things that are not really state, but, I need to execute this process, kind of. Every time I deploy an application, I want to run something, then no, it's not for that.
Right. That's maybe a managed resource can do that if the managed resources provider deals with that in a smarter way, but that's not a function. A function should not
exactly.
be that. Again, functions in the end are no different than any reconciliation loop of a Kubernetes operator or controller. And therefore, they run continuous reconciliations. That is simply, Crossplane is simply making it easy to build controllers. And that is why functions work the way they work. And I don't think there's an issue with that at all. I think to the contrary, it's smart and good. The issue is what we were saying of how you do that initial synchronization where like a DAG would help, of being able to say deploy this resource and then this resource which depends on it, and creating this kind of, DAG like Terraform does, like Crow does, would be beneficial, I think, to have. But yeah.
Okay. Statement from Jason: the challenge is most devs are not strong in infra platform engineering. True. But also most infra platform engineers are not strong in coding.
Dev.
And then everybody is not strong in strong in something and not strong in something else. So I'm careful with those statements.
I don't view that as a challenge. I don't view this at all as a challenge. A dev should not be strong in infra. Infra should not be strong in dev. Platform engineers should not be strong in infra or in dev. Everyone should be strong in what they are and should understand at a basic level all of the things that they interact with. They do not need to be strong in anything beyond what they do. It's like I've always said, the world has yet to create a very good expert full stack developer. It simply does not exist. I would love for someone to prove me wrong. But a full stack developer is a parv developer, a mediocre developer at one or both sides of the stack, right? Of front end or back end. It is simply too much for a human being to be an expert full stack developer. You can be a very good front end developer that understands back end. You can be a very good back end developer that understands front end. You cannot be an expert front end and back end. Therefore, full stack is And I think the same thing here.
I will add one thing to that, which I agree, but I will just add at scale, right? If you're a 5 people company, then kind of everybody's equally experienced and equally inexperienced at everything. Kind of, you just go. So at certain scale, you want to specialize. Now, it would be great if everybody's expert in everything. You just that human doesn't exist. That's the point.
Correct. It's not possible.
So it is a bit challenge because ideally everybody would be strong in everything, but reality hits in.
Yeah.
Okay, this is for you because I'm not that much on-prem from Nikos. Which CNI do you prefer for on-prem Kubernetes installation? I know it's not Cilium. Go.
So it's not Cilium. In my mind, it's Antria. It's my favorite. I am not a fan of Calico. Please do not even mention Flannel or anything of that sort. It would be Antria. After that, probably would be Cilium, and after that would be Calico. Would be like my order. I find Antria has the best enterprise-like features. Their network policies are the best, and I think most understandable and reasonable to traditional companies. And in the end, most on-prem environments are more traditional, more enterprisey, whatever. So it makes sense. So Antria is great for that. The performance is great. Its integration with Windows. If you have Windows containers in Kubernetes, please don't. But if you do, Antria is the best CNI to deal with that as well. And then Cilium is becoming a standard. And therefore, if not Antria, I would go with Cilium. And then I would fall back on what used to be the standard, which is Calico, which is still very strong and does have some edge cases where it's still the best in certain weird networking topologies. But in general, that would be my ordering.
Okay, from Nikos, you prefer to install Crossplane into on-prem cluster and make things into providers, probably talk with providers or something else. I prefer cloud, so I prefer not to use on-prem cluster. And I mean, so if you're using cloud, assuming that that's what you mean by providers, why go on-prem? Now, if you're hybrid, then depends, I guess. But yeah, I don't know.
If you're on-prem, I would say install it on-prem and talk to the cloud instead of install to the cloud and talk to on-prem. It'll be 100% easier for you. Okay. So if you have mixed and you don't want to install separate ones in each place and you need to manage both, manage it from on-prem, manage the cloud. Don't manage on-prem from the cloud. It makes things much easier. In terms of make things into providers, if you mean installing it on-prem and building providers, over the last 2 weeks, I built 7 Crossplane providers for on-prem technologies. And, it's great and it works well. So I would definitely recommend looking into, building providers. Use Upjet, pretty simple, and gives you awesome capabilities on-prem as well.
Easy peasy. How do you refine your metrics logs landscape when you're collecting these at scale? Time series are expensive resource-wise on the metric side, and log volumes make sizing in the backend difficult. You probably have more to say than I will, Scott, but I see people filtering it somewhere in between the source and destination. Kind of application generates incredible amount of logs, and then you get somewhere in between, filter them, and let them continue towards the destination. I think that's an easy fix. That is a bad fix. I think that if you don't need logs, don't output them in the first place. That's a hard one.
I agree, but that's a hard one because a lot of times third-party software that you have simply outputs logs that you don't want or that you don't care about. True. And all of that.
I was referring now to your apps.
Yeah. And again, that's also a difficult one when you deal with especially larger companies where the developer, what incentive does he have to lower it? It's IT that are paying the costs of dealing with the increasing log size. And from his perspective, he needs to get features out. And so there's a major challenge with that. I agree with you that that's what we have to push towards. What I view as the general practice that makes sense, the biggest issue is people leave debug logs on, right? In the end, what I say is you should have basic filtering that says error logs automatically get stored for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever, long as they go straight to Elastic. You also have some mid-tier logging that has low retention, but that has your debug logs. Now, where you throw warn and info depends on you as a company and what you have to save and what you don't have to save and all of that. But debug logs should go into a separate system that accepts everything, but retains logs for 2 days. Like, why do you need debug logs after 2 days? You should not at any use case that I can think of.
The best solutions I've seen to that, and that happens very rarely, just to be clear what I'm saying, is try to act as a business within a company. I charge services. I charge teams for log storage. You want to output petabytes of logs. I see no problem with that, as long as you pay for it.
Exactly.
And then my solution actually becomes more viable, much more viable.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
I can even filter them, but then you will pay for the network traffic. It will be cheaper,
Exactly.
but still not cheap. And
Right.
until that happens, nobody has incentive to do the right thing. And everybody is passing issues to somebody else. And then it comes to the poor person that is managing infrastructure and says, your infrastructure needs to be cheaper, but it's on you.
Exactly.
Bad business.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Jason Pauly, again, a statement more than a question about the challenge is why we shouldn't expose any raw Kubernetes to devs. My answer to that is there is a reality today and aspirations. I think that Kubernetes should get to the point, or we should get to the point, where actually Kubernetes is an implementation detail and users do not need to even know that it exists. But we are not there yet, right? So if you can create AWS-like service, like what AWS is giving you with EC2, and say, I'm going to give you all the information you need, but not more. I'm not going to tell you about the hypervisors. You're going to see only the things that matter to you. If you can do that, then yeah, don't expose anything. It's just that nobody's there yet.
So I disagree. I
Okay.
believe that we should be exposing raw Kubernetes to anyone that is deploying things onto Kubernetes. But we should be also offering simplifying abstractions that make them not need to care about the raw Kubernetes. What I mean by that, because this is a big mistake that I've seen a lot of companies do, which is say, I'm giving you the abstraction so you can create SQL claim, let's say in Crossplane, but I'm not going to give them access to all of the managed resources underneath or to the deployment of this. I'm going to give you access to create cloud native Postgres operator instance, but you cannot see stateful sets, pods, services, logs, config max. No. Everyone should be able to do that. That's not what I want them to need to do, though.
So I agree that everybody should be able to see it. Let's call it power users, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a bigger need now than it should be for everybody to see it, because we don't do the good job of propagating things that matter. So
Correct.
Let's say deployment is an abstraction in a way that ultimately creates pods. Now, if I consider that abstraction, if I look at the deployment, I will discover nothing.
Correct.
I will know nothing. Now, if you figure out, and it's doable, just very hard, how to propagate the important parts of pods, and then say, you can see the pods, but I'm giving you the information that is most likely what you need, then you still need what you said, direct access to everything. But that would be then for smaller percentage of users. Right now, you tell people you're blind and you have no access. You cannot have both.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess that Yordis this is probably a comment related to your comment. Yordis, correct us if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
On full stack engineer. So no, really no. I understand that is the 90% of the norm, but not really. I'm a software engineer. I'm not a backend or front-end engineer. And no, equally the same shit. Again, depends on scale.
Yeah.
I've seen organizations where actually milliseconds matter. Right?
Yes.
Kind of whether you write code this way or that way in Go makes a huge difference. Kind of difference that most people don't see. Right?
Oh yeah.
And the only way to write that code is to be focused on, in this case, Go. Probably even for specific implementation and not kind of, I know React as well.
Exactly.
So depends on the scale.
It really depends on the scale. All of these things, it's, yes, you can write a good multi-tier application as a software engineer. But when you are working in trading, let's say, and you're doing some automatic trading, let's say on the stock market and all that, any millisecond or even a microsecond counts here. And a millisecond could be the difference of a successful or a failed deal. And that's why all of these things are so critical. That's why the language, which I don't understand for the life of me, but people like Rust these days. It's like, this love-hate relationship within the Linux kernel. It's a love-hate relationship, it seems, in the general community as well. But Rust, the reason it's succeeding is because it is so performant. It is such good performance for a high-level language. That's why people love it. That's why Go caught on initially, and Rust is even better performance, right? It's the same thing. We need better performance tools.
And it's even, and I'm still talking about larger scale, maybe not as large as before, but even I could buy, you can do front end and back end in some situations, but then database. And I think that everybody should know SQL, just to be clear. But then optimizing database not to be a bottleneck. That requires some skill, real skill.
Yeah.
Okay, Jason, each of us, you and me, Scott, name one thing you would add and one thing you would remove. You go first.
Okay, so what I would add
to Kubernetes.
Yes. I would add namespaced CRDs.
Mm-hmm.
I really want that capability. And what I would remove etcd. Change it to something normal.
I hate you.
Although that would be replaced.
I hate you. I said go because I had those two. I thought that you would say something else. That's not.
Go first. I would have.
Yeah, it's not fair. Yeah, definitely replace etcd, but on a project level. I know that you as a creating distribution can do it, right?
Yeah.
And namespaced.
Right. Kubernetes do. Distributions don't. Please.
I would also like if somehow, I buy into the architecture of Kubernetes, but going back to my previous comments, I would like if resources would provide a bit more information about the child resources, right? Going back to my example of deployment, right? I look at the deployment and it works like a charm. None of the pods are running.
Right. You want to add event or status propagation from child to parent to ancestor relation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would love that, really. I wouldn't want necessarily everything, but kind of a bit more. Right. I understand that I need to go to the pod, but let me know that pods are not running. Kind of like put that into the status, and I'll find the pods, and I'll figure out what the reason is.
Yeah.
From Nikos, which distribution you think is best to choose for Kubernetes? I guess this does not apply to managed services like GKE, AWS, GKE, EKS, AKS, which if it does, we already commented. So, and you already actually said which distribution you like.
Spectral Cloud Palette is the best distribution today.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, here's Jason. I'm skipping a couple of comments, mostly because they're statements, not comments. Yeah, harmonica and guitar, you can do it. And I think that this is important to qualify. At least for me, I don't know about you, Scott. When I say you need to be specialized in one thing, I don't mean literally.
Right. Correct.
It can be more than one thing, but you're not the whole bloody orchestra.
Exactly. But I like this here, right? If you play harmonica and guitar, you're a genius. If you add the drum on your back, you become a circus freak. Very nice.
Okay, I think that's all. We have a couple of minutes left for any last question. Anybody? Type fast. Otherwise, we're gonna close it in 4 minutes, or we're going to close it now. It all depends on how fast you type. And since there is a like 10 seconds or something delay between when we see comments and you type it, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Don't make me. Oh. NixOS. Any future scope? I'm not personally fond of NixOS, like Nix operating system. I'm very much into Kubernetes. I don't think that operating systems are that relevant anymore. At least not of that type. And for the server side, on laptops, I think that Linux just lost the battle. Kind of like, and huge kind of like kudos to all of you using Linux on your laptop. There we go, Scott, one of them. But it's a niche thing, right? Yes. And then that niche thing is split into 5,000 niche things, kind of like.
Correct.
You're an exception. Sorry, Scott. Yes. Now, Nix packages, huge fan. Use them every single day. Absolutely amazing. I love it. It's one of the most important advancements we got in a while.
Yeah. NixOS, one of the worst OSs I've seen in my life. Don't get it at any level. I'm sorry. It makes no sense to me. Nix packages are amazing. And I wish that just NixOS would go away and that we would put all the focus onto Nix packages. Because that, I think it causes too much confusion. I hear it all the time. Like, oh, you're into Nix. What, you use NixOS? It's like, no, Nix packages. And like, I wish that it would just be focused on Nix packages because that's where the actual value is at, in my mind.
100%. Okay, there is use Talos. I have limited experience with it. Okay. Looked amazing. What is your preferred language for writing operators in? I'm going to give two answers. First, writing operators, Go. And I think that Go is like Python for ML, right? Or AI. You might like it, you might dislike it, but that's where you will find most support, huh?
It's the only real solution, exactly. I would say in the AI world, there's also Java with all the Spring AI stuff that's actually gaining traction, but it's not even close to what you have in Python. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, kind of, I feel that it is more beneficial to learn the language you don't know, if that's what you're going to focus on, but benefit from the assurance that everything will be able to work with it, then stick with your language and say, oh, but this library doesn't exist. Oh, there is no good library to interact with Kubernetes API. Kind of,
right.
Yeah. It's Go. Now, I do think that, and this is not now Crossplane talk, I think that equally applies to Crow and kubefl and so on and so forth, that you need to have a good reason to go with operator. Probably if you're creating something special, like if you want to create a Postgres operator, that's great, right? But not if you want to create an operator to manage just as a replacement for Helm, right? Kind of to compose resources, lack of a better term, in a cluster. Then use existing tools. Don't go operator framework route.
Yeah, I would say my preferred language for building operators is YAML. It's called Crossplane.
Okay, if you're going down that route, then KCL.
Yeah, for me, YAML. I don't like KCL. I like YAML. I like YTT. I like templating tools also. Just KCL hasn't caught on for me. But yeah.
When are you going to create YTT function?
I already have one locally. I just haven't published it.
Ah,
I will.
yes.
I will. It's on my to-do list. It's on my to-do list.
Okay, the last one. What about the DevOps kind of language? Best of both worlds, would you suggest to start with?
Go. YAML.
No. Bash.
You know there is the shell operator that allows you to build with shell. With bash, you can build operators. Yes, it exists. Don't use it, please. Like, please don't.
But yeah, go outside Kubernetes. I feel that, languages end up levitating towards certain use cases, right? Like you were talking about Rust. I think that Go became the de facto, the most commonly used and best supported language if you're building terminal tools, CLIs, which is what I would assume DevOps kind of language would be.
In the end, from the DevOps perspective, you're building CLIs often. That's Go. You're dealing with Kubernetes. The only language there that's relevant really is Go. Terraform providers written in Go. Crossplane providers written in Go. All of these things, which is why it is only a matter of time until you need to learn Go if you want to be an expert in the DevOps field, and to also contribute upstream, which is how you become an expert. You do not become an expert by disconnecting yourself from the community, rather by being a part of it, which means you have to know Go.
I'm trying to point here. There's the comment. Anything in CNCF. And it's true. I would be surprised if somebody would prove me wrong if I would say that 90% of CNCF, and I think that I'm being conservative now, is Go. If you include in Kubernetes, which is probably 50% of the total code base, then it's 98%. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming.
Hold on. How big is Backstage? How big is Backstage?
Huge,
Backstage
but it's
is CNCF.
Yeah, true. But I mean, would you say that Backstage is more than 5% of the Kubernetes code base?
More than 5%? It's around 5%, I would think. I think it's around 5%.
And that's Kubernetes alone. Now, most of the other projects, it's over 95%. I'm over 90 for sure. That's conservative.
Yeah.
And sooner or later, one of you is going to come up with a brilliant idea to rewrite it in Go. Sooner or later.
No.
Okay, Rust then. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.